am very happy to introduce two people you've already gotten to know rather well over the last 90 minutes or so, Julie Contreras and Mr. Bill Ackman. There are also three other people who were very important subjects in the film who are here in the audience tonight, and I just want to allow them to stand up and for you to acknowledge them as well. Aaron Chris, who is a Chicago resident. Aaron, there you are back there. This is Aaron's first time seeing the film. Thank you very much, Aaron, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
She's a hero.
Thank you. Pastor Emma Lozano, one of Julie's partners in crime, is back in the back as well. Emma? And the attorney Douglas Brooks is here as well. Thank you very much for being here. I'm sure you have questions. We will try to have answers. Yes, right in the front.
Yeah, what has happened since the film was done? Because the last entry was late last year. What has happened since then?
Since President-elect Trump appointed, asked
Icon. That's the ultimate irony.
Bill, do you have information?
So what's interesting about the FTC settlement is that they paid $200 million, but the terms of the settlement don't take effect until May being next month. So it's very much justice delayed. The stock prices bounced around, but recently hitting a new, maybe the last 12 months, it's in or around where it's been, peak, around $59 a share. The company has borrowed a lot of money and has been buying back stock. It's very much a confidence game, so they're very focused on the stock price. And they want to keep, particularly with the film going on, they've been buying stock as the film is underway. I think it's a way to help bolster confidence. Yeah. The CEO stepping down takes effect also in May. He stays on as chairman. My guess is he'll leave as soon as he can. That's what I think.
Julie, do you have any?
For the victims, 45 of them that we worked in our campaign through LULAC, only 18 of them received restitution from the Federal Trade Commission. We continue to meet monthly with them as a form of therapy and to continue their journey in the battle against Herbalife to educate others. And also today, with Douglas Brooks being in Chicago, we were able to meet with the Attorney General of Illinois to see what type of formula they'll be working. They received $3 million, so we were advocating today as well for each one of the victims. Again, many of them received no restitution, and 3 of them received $20 from the Bosniak settlement.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Question for Bill. My name is Kenny Blanc. I'm a first year at Chicago booth, first year MBA. So you saw this opportunity, and this company's generating cash. It has strong earnings. And from the sequence of the movie, it seemed like the advocacy and trying to find the victims happened after. Well, how did you think about how you were going to see this short play out at the beginning? And it seems like that changed. The mechanisms you were using changed. Going forward, like, would you think about a company that's generating cash flows that may generate those cash flows for the foreseeable future, maybe initiating with kind of the victims and the government regulators?
So this was sort of my second big public short, and the first one took years and eventually blew up, and I figured the second time I did this, it would happen much more quickly. I was wrong. I figured the first presentation was incredibly detailed, 340 slides. I thought it was irrefutable. I thought we'd give a presentation and it would be done. The other thing I didn't know is I really did not, I'd never met the victims. I didn't really know who they were. I didn't actually know that something approaching 80% of them in the U.S. are of Latino heritage. Unfortunately, what the unexpected happened. Which is that, or maybe fortunately, unfortunate for the short position, maybe fortunately for the story, for the movie. But
it often works that way.
But Carl Icahn came in and bought 20% of the company, and that's why this thing still exists, because a guy with $20 billion and a lot of influence and a lot of capital and smarts, came in to take the other side and took the story away from the victims. In our original presentation, we actually did describe who we believe was being harmed, but no one was interested in that story. I mean, unfortunately, you know, and this is something I didn't appreciate until I got to know Julie better and got to meet the people being harmed, is if you are an undocumented resident of this country, you know, the laws really, you're not really protected in the same way that you are if you're a citizen. And so if you're a victim, you're the ideal victim to be defrauded, because you're not going to complain, right? You're not going to the police, right? You're not telling your attorney general because you're concerned about being deported. And by the way, that's more so true now
Today,
Yeah.
yes.
than it was, you know, a few months ago. So that's why this thing, you know, it's been allowed to go on so long. But once this became a Wall Street fight, the sense we got was that the FTC would do nothing because they didn't want to choose sides between a couple rich people. And we realized that just getting the victims to tell their story would be helpful. And Julie was already doing that on her own. And so ultimately we connected. And there were thousands of complaints filed with the government. I think that ultimately helped. I mean, you know, in terms of, you know, I'd like to see the company obviously shut down. I think it will. You know, the good news with respect to the business, the bad news for Herbalife, is when we originally put on this investment and told our story, analysts were projecting the company would earn about $7.50 in 2017. The company's own estimates today are around half of that. You know, so the business has deteriorated, and I think it will probably go out of business in its own way. But I'd like to see it go out of business while they've got, you know, they borrowed a large amount of money. That capital could go to the victims, but if it's shut down, you know, if they spend all the money buying back stock, it will never get to the people that have been harmed.
I wanted to add something to that that's really important. You know, this is Wall Street. I'm the worst financial person standing next to the best financial person.
You're better than I am lately.
I don't know about that, but something that's really important, what Mr. Ackman did is, I mean, the people, the Latino undocumented community have been victimized for years, not only in this fraud scheme, but many others. The cultural aspect, the language, and the reality of the insecurity that they're undocumented makes it very difficult. So when I was able to see the work that Mr. Ackman was doing at a level that we have no capacity to do at, I thought maybe if we brought those together, we now have a platform for the human aspect. And I've been in the struggle for a long time. I cannot stand the name of Herbalife because I've seen what it's done in our community. They should be ashamed. Carl Icahn should be ashamed that he continues to support them and be mean to my amigo here. I think that it's very important that you know that the individuals you see on there, it's a part of our history. Mr. Ackman placed a platform there when we were able to go into the Federal Trade Commission with the victims. Some of them went into the office in Washington, D.C., but then we had the Federal Trade Commission come into our sanctuary and to our small community house. And that's the first time ever. The Federal Trade Commission didn't even have an application for a Spanish-speaking individual to fill out. And in the Latino immigrant community, even though they speak Spanish, many don't read and write. And today, because of his advocacy, our advocacy, the Federal Trade Commission now has an outreach for fraud in the Latino community. You know, that's a part of history. That deserves a big applaud. And not only the Latino community, other people who don't speak English. I think that's really important.
Other questions? Yes?
2 questions for Bill. Do you expect the government to do anything further than they've already done? And at what point do you throw in the towel? Or is there a point you throw in the towel on the trade?
Yeah, sure. So I think the FTC, what they will do from here is simply monitor the terms of the settlement. There's a third-party monitor who's actually a credible former prosecutor who is responsible for making sure that Herbalife is fulfilling the requirements to restructure their business, and I think the government will pay attention to that. There are also a number of other government regulators, both in this country and in other countries, that have ongoing investigations of the company. So I would not be surprised to see another government agency kind of intervene. In terms of the investment, you know, I've said this before. Look, I think today, you know, if I could do this all over again, I would have given my 340-page presentation, not short of the share of stock, and waited till now. That would have been a much better way to make the investment. But it's a bit of a sunk cost issue. So I think at $59 a share, stock trading at 15, 16 times earnings, there's not a huge amount of downside to be short the stock. And the FTC settlement takes effect in May. You've got a CEO stepping down. Carl Icahn's 81. I've got one competitive advantage versus Carl. So, but look, I told Julie, and I made that commitment, it's in the movie, that whether or not I have an investment relates to whether this is a good investment with respect to my investors. If it's no longer a good investment with respect to my investors, I'll cover the investment, but I will continue to pursue the company. So, until it's over.
Yes?
As Herbalife has announced kind of like how they're going to restructure the company, do you think the victims are going to be actually benefit? Have they announced how they're going to actually do that? And is the new proposed go-forward business going to be better for people?
Yeah, there is no viable business if they actually adhere to the terms of the settlement. I mean, the FTC found that there was no minimal, if any, third-party retail sales. And the FTC is requiring the company to only compensate their distributors on third-party sales to people outside the system. I mean, that's basically the change. So there's a null set of, there's no way to compensate people for sales that don't exist. So if they actually adhere to the terms of the settlement, they're done. Now, I think the bet that Wall Street's making is that they're going to evade the terms of the settlement. And that's really what's going on. But we'll see. It's interesting. I did not expect to be here 5 years in. So.
Yes?
You made a pretty interesting argument a year or two ago about the China Sales Organization, which wasn't a part of the movie. Do you have an update about that and how that came through with the Chinese government? Or?
Yeah, so Herbalife's operating illegally in China. It's actually violating Chinese laws against multi-level marketing companies. The most interesting thing that came up in the last few months is that the company is now under investigation for bribing government officials in China. So, which makes sense, because how could they continue to operate for so long in China illegally? Well, now there's a Foreign Corrupt Practices investigation of the company in China. And I think and the China business is already being affected. It was the big growth engine of the business, because obviously, 1.5 billion people. It was growing at 30% year on year a year ago, and in the last quarter it declined. So we'll see. I mean, again, I'm still puzzled as to why anyone would invest in this company, but.
Yeah.
I want to add something, the human aspect again. So as we have Wall Street, we've had Chinese victims contact us at LULAC. We've translated, they say the same thing. It's a practice and pattern of deception, many people being hurt. I had a young girl's family in Chiapas that she died of consumption of the product. Unfortunately, the Mexican government is very corrupt, and when we went to the Department of Justice there, they've done nothing, and the father wants no financial restitution. He wants justice for the death of his daughter. Herbalife went in there and covered that up completely in the little town that she's from, Chiapas. It's one of the poorest states in Mexico. So you can imagine Herbalife clubs there. I can't imagine that. We've also had people from Bolivia, which I was able to advocate for one, sending Alan Hoffman an email and pictures of the product, and they immediately took care of that individual. But we have people from Venezuela and other countries that contact us that want help. We cannot really do much outside. We try to connect them with their departments of justice there, because again, without complaints and without people standing, there's no change. And for me, seeing how the FTC and all these entities that are supposed to be protecting consumers working, I see that there's a lot of politics, I call it, that is occurring. And I sometimes ask, how deep do the political corruption pockets of Herbalife go? Because the reality is that somebody should be shutting down these criminals. If I stole $5 from Ted or Bill today, I would be arrested. I would be a criminal, and Herbalife has sold millions of dollars away, and they're still walking around. I, too, like Mr. Ackman, want them to be shut down, not because I have any financial interest, but because they've committed crimes against a very vulnerable community.
Yes.
This is a question for both Julie and Bill. Herbalife is not the only multi-level marketing company. Are you hoping to make an example of them, or are you going to, pick up more of these fights?
Well, I think the most important thing is we need to have educational materials out there, not just leaving a pamphlet. We have to go out there. We started in our church a fraud committee, and we go out and we educate people just like we do the Know Your Rights campaign. We put a component in there because I could speak for the Latino community only. They're targeted much by notarial fraud, Amway, other OmniLife, all these different types of pyramid schemes. And for ourselves, the most important thing we can do is go out and educate them so that they can go out and, we say in Spanish, pasa la voz, pass the message out, and to protect them and help them, because it was very difficult. I speak English and Spanish, and I felt it was very difficult to, if I show you the forms that I created with a pen and sent it to the Federal Trade Commission, as an American, I find that rather embarrassing. But I don't want to talk politics anymore. I'll pass this to Bill.
Yeah, I think one of the best things that came out of our efforts here is we've, I think, really elevated the topic of pyramid schemes and how they look. And Herbalife is not by any means the only company that operates the way it does. John Oliver did a superb piece. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but I encourage you to go online, type in John Oliver Herbalife, and it's a 32-minute takedown of pyramid schemes generally. Herbalife, using Herbalife as an example, it's been viewed 10 million times on YouTube, 2 million times in Spanish. So I think there is more sort of a consumer protection message out there. I think the film does a very important job. It's done very well. The film is now, 10 days.
Yeah, we're in the second week. We're the top documentary on iTunes. We were briefly the #1 independent film on iTunes.
And there's still more impressive than that. The film I just looked tonight, it's number 36 most downloaded film on iTunes. It's been between 28 and 36. Yeah. It's ahead of Manchester by the Sea
and Moonlight.
So I think it's all about getting the word out. But the pyramid scheme industry is an industry, and it is huge.
One thing that neither Bill nor Julie has mentioned, which was very significant, I thought, in the Federal Trade Commission's announcement of the Herbalife settlement, was Edith Ramirez, the chairwoman, made a point of saying that she hoped that the settlement would serve as a model for the multi-level marketing industry generally, which I interpreted as a sign that the Federal Trade Commission was mindful of these practices across the industry, whether that translates into action or not. But it was a signal, I thought. Other questions? Yes.
Do you see any legislative action in the future that would target things specifically like this?
But there's something very easy the government could do that would make these schemes very difficult to operate. The reason why Herbalife is able to be so successful is it's the design of the compensation structure, where they'll compensate you for recruiting effectively an infinite number of people. And the basic idea behind multi-level marketing seemed reasonable, which is that if you recruit someone and you get paid a portion of their sales, they just carried it to an extreme. So actually, interestingly, Avon, which is perhaps the least successful multi-level marketing company, only compensates people 3 levels, and the most compensation you get is from the first level, and next person down you get a smaller commission, the next person down an even smaller commission. After that, you don't get paid at all. There's no incentive to build these massive pyramids, and as a result, it's not as lucrative a system in terms of encouraging people to recruit. Herbalife compensates you for an infinite number of downlines, and they pay you more on people the further away they are from you. And that design sort of mathematically encourages a certain kind of behavior. And I think if the government just simply made it illegal to compensate people for more than 2 levels beneath you, for example. The whole idea was, with Avon, the reason why you get paid for recruiting someone is that you're their coach and you're helping them. But the notion that you can actually help someone who's multiple levels away from you is really a fiction. And I think the failure of the settlement with Herbalife is twofold. One, the government didn't use the term pyramid scheme in describing the business, even though the complaint mirrors all their other pyramid scheme complaints, and that was negotiated out in the settlement. The other thing is they didn't have to change this ability to compensate people from an infinite point of view. So that still exists. If they made that illegal, it would be done. And people who work for pyramid schemes, go to the pyramid schemes that have the most lucrative compensation structure. Herbalife has one of the most, if not the most lucrative structure, and it's had to make it more lucrative each year. That's how it stayed in business for 36 years. And people will leave once it's no longer the most profitable, and they'll go, unfortunately, to the next one. So I just think you need to make it illegal to have compensation that goes beyond a couple levels.
Actually, it's someone in the back, because all you folks have been up front. Yes, with the blue scarf.
Great.
I'll get you, don't worry.
So a lot of us here are MBA students at Booth.
You are.
And as we start our careers, we're obviously all going to face
No filmmaking
doubt.
students.
We're all going to face doubt and maybe failure. So I'd like to hear from Julie and Bill. Do you have any advice for us based on your Herbalife
Well,
experience?
as a filmmaker, I have a lot of experience with doubt and failure on probably a higher rate than either of them, but I will let them answer the questions.
You know, I think something that it's just Herbalife, I mean, what I do every day in my life is my specialty is intervention with deportation, humanitarian rescue missions. So when Herbalife came to me, I didn't want to touch it because I was like, oh, okay, this is a multi-level marketing. But it showed me so much suciedad, like dirtiness within our political realm. And again, I'm from the south side of Chicago, so I say politics. And it's been very sad, and you know, you are raised to believe in saints, and you see that they're really sinners. And the bottom line is that these individuals, like Michael Johnson, the Elfin Prince, we call him, he benefits off the backs of undocumented immigrants. So these are the quote-unquote people in the shadows, yet you're benefiting from the labor that they're doing in factories or waiting on the corners. I think that it's like a very well-kept, dirty little secret. And for me, the most important part is the human aspect of it. And our politicians, and there's like DSA, all these people that lobby for these things that are impacting us, not only the undocumented, but those of us that are, you know, legal American citizens, need to really make a change. And like I said, the message that Mr. Ackman brought with the human aspect that we were able to bring forth, it's a very important, profound message. And the Federal Trade Commission here in the Midwest is having like these open talks with the community. That's important, but it's not just the Latino community. There's the Chinese, the Vietnamese community, the African American community that's impacted by it again. And I think they fail us when they don't do this. And now we have Donald Trump as our president, so and Carl Icahn giving advice. So I don't really know how positive that is for us as American citizens.
Yeah, I guess the advice I would give students is, I think the biggest risk you have in going to Chicago Booth Business School is you probably haven't done a lot wrong. You probably haven't failed a lot to get into a very good business school, right? You probably did well in high school, and as a result, you've gotten to a good college, and you did well in college, and you got a good job, and you got a good recommendation, and then you got into a business school, so you've experienced only success. And in my experience in life, as the most successful people I know, their success largely has to do with how they deal with failure. And you're going to fail at some point. Something bad's going to happen. It could be your health that fails, it could be the health of a family member, or it could be bad things happen. You could get fired from your job, you could make a mistake. And how you deal with disappointment and failure, I think ultimately has a huge impact on your success. And there's almost no successful person I know that hasn't had a major bump in the road. And if you fall down, you get up, you brush off the mud, and you keep moving. And I mean, Julie's like that. She never gives up, and you never give up. And, I guarantee you'll be successful. I sound now like I'm like Mark Hughes.
Another thing I would add, and I think both Bill and Julie have spoken quite articulately to this, is that in adversity, as a filmmaker, I can tell you, in adversity, people discover what they really value. And what I think Bill is pointing to is that by taking risks, by hazarding failure and actually allowing it to happen, or fighting it and having it happen anyway, you oftentimes discover what really matters. And one of the things that makes both Bill and Julie and Doug and Aaron and Lozano such compelling figures to watch on the screen is that in some way or another in this arena, they are working very closely to something that they value very deeply. And I find, as a filmmaker, those people are fascinating to watch and oftentimes very successful. Often successful by different yardsticks, but have a kind of integrity and authenticity to success in their lives that's quite moving and compelling. Try to squeeze a little filmmaking in here. Other questions? Yes? But there's a guy behind you, and then I'll get you next, I promise you.
Bill, I want to ask about the presentation you were shown making the film. You thought you were delivering a death blow to Herbalife, where afterwards the stock was up 20%. People thought you were missing smoking gun there. Why do you think there was such a big gap in perception there, and people weren't really kind of, I guess, hearing what you were saying?
So I made a couple of mistakes. Among them, one, I was concerned that we weren't going to have enough people at the presentation, because we didn't have a lot of people sign up for it. And so I decided to go on CNBC the day before and really promote pretty aggressively what was coming the next day. And everything I said I believed. But the stock went down like 20% between the day I promoted the event and the date of the event. And so when the company didn't immediately implode, it went back up to where it was trading the previous week. But that became the headline. And and so stock goes up on the day, so people just ignored what I had to say. The other thing I've learned is that when you're so close to something and you've done an enormous amount of work and you know it extremely well, markets take a very long time to adjust to information. And so the best approach is under-promising and then letting the facts ultimately speak for themselves. But I just think Herbalife is not really a multi-level marketing company. It's the most brilliant PR company in the world. I mean, for this company to take the FTC settlement and say this was an endorsement of our business model, and just even the way they manipulated that day, they leaked to the Wall Street Journal in the morning that the FTC had found them not to be a pyramid scheme, and the Journal ran with that headline early in the morning. The stock was up pre-market significantly, and people are just lazy. They don't read. I mean, the FTC settlement was 40 pages.
Yes.
We don't have time to read that. The stock's up. The market says, the Wall Street Journal headline, and it's really remarkably how things work, certainly in the short term. But the company's done a remarkable job managing through bad news. Now, I think the failure is the SEC, because you cannot make false and misleading statements as a CEO of a public company, which this company has done time and time again, and they've yet to punish the company for that, which I don't understand. I really don't understand. Yes?
This one's for Bill. So I can imagine these public battles have created some difficult conversations with investors. Has that shaped the way in which you manage your firm?
Yeah, this will be my last public short position. It's just not. It's not a great use of time and energy, and I think, in retrospect, I'll go to John Oliver and have him make the presentation and do a better job. Or I'll take it on philanthropically. I think the fact that we had a short position and stood to profit, even though I committed to give away the money, I might make here. Still people are very suspicious and skeptical of someone who has a financial interest, particularly a negative financial interest. Whereas when people own a stock and they go on CNBC and they talk about it, people aren't skeptical, right? So it's sort of this interesting thing where if you're negative about a company you stand to profit, people say, well, how can I believe you? Whereas if you own a stock, people say, oh, you have your money where your mouth is. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. So.
Yes, way in the back.
Question for Bill and Julie. Bill, I never knew the company to be so global. There seem to be a lot of places in South America as well. Do you think that, and it seems like they're still growing, that the company still has life, and your short position might be a longer life as well? And Julie, the bus scene with the Latinos, is Herbalife still very present in the Latino communities in Chicago?
Say that. We call it Herbalize. And we do know that many of as it showed you on the film, they do not survive not even a year. And today, at least in my community in Waukegan, there is not as many as there were in the past. And I see it dwindling in our community. Like we say, pasa la voz. We're passing the information on. We could show movies, we could give pamphlets. But when that collateral damage comes from the voice, Wall Street is like, ooh, way over many of our heads. And again, the human aspect of everything. So if we have individuals sharing their testimony in the community, I don't see as many of the clubs opening, and I don't see them surviving. I heard Bill mention a slow death, and I absolutely believe that Herbalife team, and Edith Ramirez didn't say it was not, but she didn't say it was. That's where the political disappointment comes in. But in reality, it is. And we have the victims who provided that testimony. And the settlement was there with attorneys for Herbalife that were retired federal judges, former U.S. attorneys, public servants that are now bowing down to this criminal entity. For us, we now know that in the community, it's not a product that people are using. We see people now that we're able to educate them and hopefully have this. And John Oliver, I see a lot of young Latinos, just absolutely, don't drink and drive and don't drink Herbalife. There's a lot of things going out there. And I think that's important for us to educate the community so that there could be real change.
Yeah, and so I think I agree we're getting closer to the end simply because, one, Herbalife's really not growing in most places around the world. And if you look at the countries that they've recently entered, you have to wonder what the potential is. I mean, they've entered Botswana. Okay, I think the average daily income is under $1, in Botswana. And these people are going to buy a $42 meal replacement shake to lose weight. The whole thing is crazy. So I do think they're running out of, all that being said, they got 7 billion people in the world. They have to refine 2 million new distributors a year. That's still a pretty small number in the context of the number of people that you can deceive. So, bedtime, what do you think, Ted?
Well, they seem eager to, maybe one more question, Bill? You got enough gas in the tank?
I'm fine.
Okay. Actually, there's more than one question. I haven't gotten the signal from our theater director. Did anybody else have any questions? Yes?
So, I have a question for Julie. In addition to, one of the things that struck me about this particular Herbalife, but these MLMs in general, is it's pitting members of the community against each other, which you kind of hinted at in the film as well. So I was just wondering, from an activist perspective, in addition to the dedicated and truly excellent work you've already done, what are the kinds of things that can be done from an activist perspective for these ventures that sort of split a community apart rather than outside forces, which is your area of expertise based on what you said?
So Herbalife, as I mentioned, came into our barrios like a thief in the night. And it also came into a lot of other Latino organizations. The Mexican Fine Art Museum donating $50,000 to them, other, Ushli, another, I get in trouble for talking about that, but for me, first of all, our families are not to negotiate with, and they're definitely not for sale. They have suffered horrendously, and for me as a freedom fighter and for someone that will stand for a truth, it's like truth without boundaries for me when it comes to something. And I think that it's very important when you're in, no matter what the struggle may be, fraud that's being committed by this corporation or anyone else, I think our government entities and those in the financial world need to know that there's real human beings being impacted. And as of today, my entire time in the struggle, I always bring the human aspect. Just like in a federal immigration court, we enter with refugee children and we pray. And in our nation today, it's in a crisis when you have Muslim children that fear that their parent may not be allowed to come back into the country, or Latino children afraid that their mom and dad will be deported before they get home from school, or Jewish children afraid to go worship on Sunday in the synagogue for afraid that it's bombed. It's just a matter of us standing as one people to make a difference and a change, especially when you have something like Herbalife. Again, what I've learned from the financial world, long, short, I had no idea what that was. And sometimes I feel a little insulted because we'll have the Herbalife investors that are bulls, I think it is. They'll attack me on Herbalife, even as recent as one John Hempton saying that he was going to support me and the Latino immigrant victims that gave testimony to the FTC. I mean, who do they think they are that they can say this to us? Just because we're have an accent, that doesn't mean we're not intelligent. And I think it's important to be committed. Even when you're in the business world, you have to remember always the people at the base, those that are there walking in the mud and sticking their hands in the mud.
One last question.
Yeah, one last question. So one of the things I noticed in the film is you didn't interview someone who may have had success at Herbalife, like higher up. It didn't seem to fit the narrative. Did you reach out to those people and they declined, or what
I'm glad you asked the question.
Yeah.
As I conceived the film, I had wanted to do it as a sort of battle film where we were following Bill and Julie, as well as a sort of an Herbalife distributor who was trying to make a go of it, and one of their executives. And I spent the better part of 10 months speaking with Herbalife corporate. I started with Michael Johnson, the CEO. I spent a couple of hours with him alone, and then met with him again, his head of corporate communications, and spoke with some current very high-ranking distributors, as well as former executives and former distributors. At the end of those 10 months, they declined to participate. It was a big disappointment to me. But they didn't completely lock the door shut. They said, it's just too much of a circus for us right now. Stay in touch, we might change our mind. But I had to, and the film production as a whole, figure out a way to tell the story without their participation. And I didn't have a particular agenda. I mean, though the film may, to your point of view, have a very strong perspective at the end. At the beginning, I was simply curious. I was a dramatist, not an activist. I wanted to bring to life this interesting conflict. And so I had to find a different way to structure the film, a different way to tell the story. Fortunately, Bill and Julie had both agreed to participate by that point, and we had filmed the Nutrition Club presentation, which was a very dramatic day, as you pointed out. The stock went up instead of going down. Bill had made a number of very dramatic claims about what happened that day and had given us a tremendous amount of access to him. So I knew that that was an event around which I could shape the film. And the other thing that gave me heart was that I had gotten to know and understand how Herbalife worked. These people had spoken very candidly off the record. People like Aaron, who is in the film, but as well as a number of other former distributors who gave me a very full, and executives, full picture of the film, full picture of what was going on. So I could use that in the film, combined with the archival material that they pump out into the world, you know, in just heaps. And between what was publicly available and what I knew about the company, I felt like I could give a fairly fair picture of how they view what they're doing and why they're doing it. So even though they weren't present in the sense of active participants in the film, they occupy close to half of the film, the archival material. And those statements by Michael Johnson, Des Walsh, the president, John DeSimone, Ibby Fleming, she's an officer of the corporation, vice president of Herbalife, says it's simply impossible to lose money in Herbalife. Those are public statements by officers of the corporation. I think they fairly represent what they're thinking. So,
I think they're quacks.
Okay, thank you all very much for coming.